going to try to start the presentation today with a poll. So get out your phones and let me know when your last memorable safety interaction was with your employing organization. Was it today? Was it a week ago? Was it a month ago? Can't remember. Which of those time frames do we have? We have some of the TechStop folks answering today. All right, look at that, within the last week. So we can tell that this is definitely a TechStop weighted crowd and that there's been some memorable things that have occurred for you to remember safety. One of the things I know as a parent, I think anybody who's a parent in here inherently gets, when you have an interaction that has a lot of emotion attached to it, it's much more memorable, especially negative emotions such as fear or anxiety, such as when your kids scare the crud out of you. You really remember that, especially when they start driving. So, all right, well, let's go on. Everyone wants a safe workplace, but creating it and maintaining a safe workplace is a challenge. Developing the safety awareness that it takes requires a strong and focused organizational culture. Maintaining that awareness requires continuous effort. So if we have a challenge just creating a regular safe workplace, do we have a completely impossible task when we're trying to create a safe workplace within a roadway construction work zone? Let's look at some of the items that drive safety in the workplace. TxDOT, as the owner, sets the foundation. The developer and contractor build on that foundation, creating a framework for their employees to have a safe workplace with the traveling public. The traveling public then enters that workplace each and every day, sometimes creating positive interactions, sometimes creating some negative interactions. Let's take another quick poll of the group. Which one of these groups has the biggest, largest effect on safety? Is it the owner? Is it TxDOT? Is it the traveling public? Is it the developer or contractor? Or is it some other group? This polling stuff is kind of cool. You kind of get a sense of the room without it. People have to raise their hands. Okay, so we're seeing kind of some splits there. Some folks think the owner has a lot to do with it. Others think the contractor or developer do. But a lot of you, I get the sense that the public has a whole lot to do with our safety. As a TxDOT employee, I think TxDOT has a lot to do with setting expectations of safety. As a relative newcomer to TxDOT, I was immediately struck by the organizational culture for safety. TxDOT's focus on safety is probably one of the strongest organizational cultures I've had the experience in all of my employers. There's a list here on the board of all the different ways that TxDOT internally supports safety measures. It's notable how much expense and effort gets put towards the safety training. The developer on SPD projects also has some responsibilities to creating a safe workplace. They have to create a safe workplace for their employees out on the road. They have to follow OSHA requirements. They have to meet TxDOT's contractual requirements, and they have to meet their internal company requirements. On SPD projects, I've included a clip from our 35E contract language here. That language makes it very clear that the developer is the lead entity in creating safety out on the project. Now this creates a little bit of a challenge for the TxDOT oversight staff. That means we have to accomplish our safety goals for TxDOT in a little less direct ways. In a design build project, you do not want to be directing the developer's activities. Instead, you have to accomplish your goals some other way. Suggestions, reminders, some persuasion, some more reminders, and then there's escalation methods too, if it's required. As y'all all voted here in the poll, one of the biggest components that we have is the traveling public. We all drive around each day, and if you look around at anybody in the vehicle next to you, I bet if you look left and you look right, at least one of the two other people you look at will be distracted by an electronic device. You see the two extremes here. You have one driver who's focused on the driving task, is attentive, focused on driving safely, and another one whose top priority is probably not watching out for anybody on the roadway or being prepared for anything that might happen. Just the other day I was driving down the highway, a couple things fall off a work truck, and you're just hoping that they don't come hit you and damage your own vehicle. So it's very tempting in this kind of environment to complain and fall into a mode where you just say, well, you know, you just can't fix stupid. And people do stupid things. We've all done stupid things. Hopefully nobody did anything questionable on the way here, but all at times we all make some choices that probably are not the best for that moment in time. And so our job as transportation professionals requires us to work for ways to try to make the roadway system a little bit safer for the drivers. So to learn a little bit more about how we can bring safety, let's talk about the environment that we're working in. The 35E project is a 30-mile long project. It has some unique characteristics. We're both rehabilitating the road and reconstructing portions of it. It stretches from Dallas all the way to Denton. It's a very densely populated area. It has a high number of commuters, and that mixes with interstate traffic traveling through the project. The driving environment for all the drivers is very challenging. It has many variables, and honestly, it's consistently inconsistent. You do not know day to day what you will encounter when you're traveling through our project. Safety was a big concern for us early in the project development, and it has remained a concern for every person on this project through today. Scott talked about transparency in SPD. SPD has created a dashboard report. This dashboard has some key performance metrics. Safety is one of those. Safety is kind of challenging to define. Most often you hear about the lack of safety. People say things like, well, that's not safe. So that's how you define it, by the number of incidents, the number of injuries, and the number of crashes. So TxDOT-SPD recognized how important the work zone safety effort was, and is tracking safety on this monthly report. It's an internal report that at the project level we produce and the administration looks at. This is the safety section of the performance metric that I have here. You'll see the scale on the left-hand side here is the number of traveling public crashes. The scale on the right-hand side is the number of owner or contractor incidents. So a couple notes. Obviously, the traveling public incidents have increased from the baseline that we did prior to construction. We'll talk a little bit more about the traveling public incidents later. The contractor incidents, you can see a spike this summer as efforts really ramped up. Now, I want to point out that these are not normalized rates, but just raw numbers of incidents. So these are OSHA recordable incidents. So if you've ever looked at what an OSHA recordable incident was, as I start looking through these logs, it can include things like a guy slipping, his hand slips on a wrench and knocks a tooth out. That's a recordable. A poison ivy case, which was one of ours this last month, is a recordable because it required a prescription for steroids. If they have an antibiotic eye drop put in their eye because of debris, that is a recordable incident. So keep that in mind when you look at these incidents on the number of man hours. the raw numbers created a situation that we did want to look at and ask ourselves, what's going on? The developer looked at this and said, do we have a problem? They redoubled their safety training efforts and looked at some of the things that were causing incidents and put some more training on that. I would say, you know, looking at these kind of results, it can be a little uncomfortable for the staff that gets asked those questions month after month. How are we addressing safety? And sometimes there's things that we can do and look to try to do in every way how we can help. The one good thing about looking at raw numbers is it does certainly point to when there's a spike in incidents. It tells you early, quickly, that you need to look at and examine whether something needs further addressing. Okay, so next, the developer efforts. Recall I mentioned earlier, the developer has a primary role in work zone safety. They design the project, they construct it, they communicate with the public, and they monitor it and maintain the roadway conditions. Our developer on this project is Archer Western, Granite, and Lane in a joint venture. And this joint venture team was able to pull their best practices from all three of those organizations. One of their best practices was to make sure that every new worker on the job goes through safety training before they're out on site. Every new worker is a blue hard hat for 90 days. One of their measures that they stepped up this summer is these new guys were paired with a more experienced guy so that they would work together, the newer guy working with the more experienced guy watching out for him as their buddy, to try to make sure that their AGL's organizational culture for safety gets transmitted to those newer hires. So that was one of the efforts that seems to have paid off there. They also have similar safety protocols as TxDOT, walk around your vehicle before you take off. They have enhanced their crane procedures and aerial boom lift training. And in addition, we have a bridge, over a mile-long bridge that we're building across the lake. So there are additional procedures for safety while working on the lake. You can see some of that kind of construction going on there. In addition, AGL uses the typical safety incentives. Some other developer efforts to help with the public, traveling public safety. They use their public information outreach to try to build their social media. Well, there we go. They use Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, email, text messages, all to try to reach the members of the public to make them aware of incidents, temporary closures, detours that are needed, so that by the time the driver gets to an incident on the roadway, they have done everything they can to avoid it. The AGL also, their PI team has extended TxDOT's billboard campaigns, and they leverage the local stakeholder cities' public information groups to provide information out to a broader audience. So any questions that come to, say, the city or colleges, they're able to help answer those questions and point them at AGL's efforts. One area that's received, AGL also participates in some community events. It helps community members get to know the construction staff as people and remember they're people too. They're not just guys in an orange vest getting in your way when you're trying to go to work. One effort that's received a lot of media attention has been the Barrel Monster campaign. Crews along the project received a small budget to build safety monsters out of recycled construction barrels and other materials to draw the public's attention to the message of work zone safety during National Safety Week in May. There were some concerns from TxDOT staff at first to make sure that they located these monsters appropriately along the road so that it didn't become its own incident by drivers being distracted by these. But we worked with those, and we have this year's crop of barrel monsters up here. Each one of these had a safety message that was associated with it. And so now we're going to take a poll of the room and see which of these guys you think has the best safety message for us. I'll kind of go down the list here. The first one is King Kong, dismiss your distraction. The second one, B, is the University of North Texas Eagle. It's a no-fly zone, slow your roll. C is the Emmett from the Lego movie. It says, let go of your phone in my work zone. D is Dumbo, who is reminding you to travel through the work zone safely. E is the follow the flagger with the AGL airplane. And E was segment 1, reminding you to dig safety with your backhoe. So it looks like this group, we have an overwhelming favorite of the Lego guy. I'm not surprised, a bunch of engineers, yes. That's my personal favorite. I like the Lego guy, but I spend a lot of time with Legos with my children. So the public's favorite, it actually was the elephant. It's really well done. You can see that elephant was quite a work of art. Okay, so these messages, even today, several of these barrel monsters remain out on the project, bringing people's attention to the need to have safety. And it does get some mostly positive remarks. We do have some criticism, but that comes along with the territory. Another way AGL was able to use some public media efforts was recycling a vehicle of theirs that was wrecked by a drunk driver. So they put this display up near their yard to remind the traveling public that you need to be safe and that their workers are in danger every night that they go out and work on the project. So in addition to just the developers' efforts, TxDOT has also worked with them to try to come up with some other ways that we can suggest to the developer to help extend safety. We worked with TTI to review the crash data from Chris. We look at that every month. And while it's typical for accident rates to go up in construction zones, you also want to look at that data and look for hot spots or any patterns that are changes in traffic patterns that may be contributing to any of the accidents. On 35E, we're able to look at it and determine that accidents are about evenly split between light and dark conditions, but about 2/3 of the accidents that we see out there are rear end and side swipe accidents. We've worked on a list of things to suggest to AGL to incorporate into their design plans and to take into consideration as they're making modifications out there. We were able to get a lowered construction speed limit for the northern section of the project where there are only 2 lanes in each direction, so that with any luck will help a little bit. And we've asked the local police departments to increase their enforcement, but it's kind of challenging when there is no shoulder to pull someone over on, so the police forces really have limited options for enforcement in those areas. Some other things that we've been able to use to help is some traffic shifts gave us some opportunities for improvement. A couple of the early traffic shifts didn't go completely smoothly, and even though AGL had a safe to open process, they looked back at what didn't go right on those and improved on that process and developed a new alignment review process. This is a more intensive review of a planned alignment shift. The lead quality manager kind of initiated this effort. He worked with the QA and QC staff, with their construction segment managers, the MOT from AGL, and ask TxDOT and our GEC staff to work with them and put our eyes on it as well, and look at the plans thoroughly to make sure that what the designers included in those design plans still match the conditions out in the field today. That's a key, because sometimes if they accelerate a particular part of the work, it may not match up to the assumptions that are kind of embedded in the plan. So this effort helps review that. We also participate with the contractor, developer, staff on every 2 weeks we drive with them. It's a limited crew in one vehicle, the lead quality manager, the MOT, QA staff members, and one of the TxDOT or GEC staff. Drive the project collectively and notice anything and kind of agree on things that might need some attention or improvements. It might be striping, it might be barrier placement, or it might be an operation that we observe in progress. And one of these drives happens at night every quarter, so that you're checking reflectivity of the devices as well. So now we've talked about what we want to do. We've covered a lot of positive things. The fun part that everybody really gets into is the pictures of kind of like what not to wear, what not to do. You know, sometimes these pictures, you learn a lot from looking at pictures. You just go, oh, no, we don't want to do that. So we found a few of those, and want to ask you all, you know, think about this as you look at this picture. What's wrong? What would you do if you drove by a construction site and you see this in progress? You have a worker who's there very diligently, but you really might want to reconsider his choice of work platform. 5-gallon buckets with the board across it in the midst of a bunch of muck might not be the safest situation. So we address something like that and ask them to reconsider. Here's an example where we've shifted the main lanes towards the center to make room for a work zone on the outside. The temporary markings, the new ones, didn't really show up, and they faded rapidly. The removal of the old markings left a pretty dominant marking, so there's a lot of shadowing, and there was some limited use of raised pavement markers. So it led to some issues with drivers not being clear where they were supposed to be driving. A little bit more context: the paint that the developer was using met the contract requirements. The methods of removal met the contract requirements. The outcome wasn't what we wanted, however. Conversations with the developer, they recognized it, they looked at the situation, they tried remedying it, and ultimately they went out with thermoplastic markings and improved it, and we got much better results. We've been successful with some of the newer traffic shifts with using the thermo, because it's held up the way we expect it with some of the more recent traffic shifts. Here's a operation in progress, and probably a few of you can notice that there's just at least one problem with this. We saw a few more. Not only is there a lack of traffic control in advance of the vehicle stopped in a through lane, the worker has his back to oncoming traffic while he's on the phone. You might need a little bit of protection between the excavation area and the through traveling lane. And if you look very carefully, you can see underneath the pickup truck, you can see a foot. So where is that worker going to come out? That might step right out in oncoming traffic. So things like this really need to have some attention. And this was very early in the going, and this subcontractor did get some additional discussions about appropriate work zone setup. Okay, so here is an example of one of our most congested areas on the 35E project. Here you have Beltline Road. You have in the foreground, you have College Street right here. Immediately behind it, you have a railroad crossing, and then you see the traffic signals. That's at Beltline Road. On top of which you have construction of a grade separation going on. And you also have a multitude of signs. And I drive this not quite every day, but often enough that I look at that and I just think, how many signs did I not see the last time through? There's an overwhelming amount of information being presented to the driver here. Not to mention the changeable message sign being completely obscured by the material delivery. It's just a very congested area. And so what I would suggest here is there's probably a lot more going on, and maybe another sign is probably not the answer here. Just in case there's anyone wondering. Okay. Here you have a bridge widening along our project. It has some existing sight distance issues. In addition, there's no illumination on this end of the bridge. And the shadowing from the older pavement marking removal is there. And you have a little bit faded stripes, and you have a full lane offset here. You come over the bridge, or you're coming up the bridge. We suggested that they put down some raised pavement markers as well as improving the striping there. And this is particularly noticeable when you look the other direction as you come over the bridge and face that full lane offset. You could, those stripes would help, as well as having a stop bar so that you notice the stop sign that's nearly hidden behind the 35E route sign. So this is another one where some raised pavement markers at times would help provide more positive guidance. Here's an example where they striped exactly according to the plan. 1 foot off the barrier, 12 foot off the next stripe, and 12 foot off the next stripe. But that's at 60 mile an hour speed limit. That's probably not the smoothest alignment. The developer looked at this and had their striping sub go improve the striping, so you can see that that got improved. One thing though, when you look at the photo, it became really clear that sign is probably not needed at this point, and it's not exactly the correct direction of sign either. So some takeaways that, you know, from my standpoint as have someone who's designed MOT plans a long time ago and looking at this, I think, you know, when we talked about which group has the most to contribute to safety earlier in the presentation, I think design engineers, and there's more than a few of you out there, have a whole lot to contribute to safety on the project, and the construction staff. Getting familiar with the environment. One of the things I did notice on our project, for better or for worse, this is part of the contractual requirements, it's compliant with it, but the developer design staff were not from the local area. They were from, sometimes located temporarily in the area, but they were not from the local area. They weren't familiar with traffic patterns. So that led to a little bit more conversations during design and remarks that were made on the plans to try to improve and take into account the local stakeholder thoughts. Another thing that TTI has suggested to me in looking at some of the crash data, what their experience has shown is if you design to the minimum taper that's allowed, you're really not giving those drivers a lot of cushion to react to narrowing of lanes, adding the barrier, getting everybody kind of squished into the construction zone. So consider lengthening those transitions and tapers so that you have maybe a little bit more time for that somewhat distracted driver to react to, oh wait, I should put my phone down and pay attention. I don't have room to make any mistakes here. So those are a couple things. Avoiding PIs in any striping alignments. While passenger cars can do that, trucks don't react to that very well, and it's kind of scary to drive next to an 18-wheeler that's trying to navigate a PI stripe. That's just not a good choice. And to have design engineers on call to, say, developer staff to review these alignments in the field and ensure that the intent of their designs is actually being able to be implemented. The usual construction sorts of things, such as making sure you implement traffic control measures, maintaining your housekeeping, and using quality markings, because markings are what the driver experiences each and every day. So with that, I'm going to do a final poll, and I'll take questions while you're responding. Just a quick 1 or 2 word answer, something you might be able to take away from this presentation and put into practice on your projects. Just looking for a little bit of feedback there. So with that, do we have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I love this presentation. It's very informative. You mentioned at the beginning the billboards for highlighting worker safety.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, that's not a traditional, tool. How effective was it? Do you feel? I mean, you may not have quantitative data, but then also, how did you find it?
Okay. Yes, repeat the question. Okay, so your question is the billboard safety campaign, how was it, how effective do we believe it was, and how was it funded? My understanding from the PI group is the developers PI group arranged for the placement. Primarily, these were on a couple billboards that I believe one of them is operated by one of the local stakeholders, and so it was essentially free time. And I believe that they may have done some placements in other locations. I'm not exactly sure all the different locations. I know the one I see every morning is on the free billboard, so I know that was there. And I think it does not hurt for drivers to get that reinforced. I get reminded every so often when you drive down the road and you see the billboards. It is good to see some of the TxDOT billboard campaigns in places. I think you'd have to do some polling to try to figure out how effective they are in changing people's behavior. I think personal behavior is what we're really trying to get to, and it takes a lot to change people's behavior in their car, with their phone. They think it won't happen to me. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Did the contract have any law enforcement capabilities?
Did the contract have any law enforcement capabilities? No, our developer does not, but we have a monthly traffic management committee coordination meeting with all of the stakeholder entities along the corridor. There are 8 cities, a couple colleges, some transit agencies, and we bring in those first responders every month. We talk about any issues they're seeing, and the developer leads that, or TTI leads that, facilitates that meeting. The developer is sitting there presenting what is going to be upcoming and takes feedback from the law enforcement. And so that helps us recognize where there are any hot spots. Yes, sir.
What from the developer's project-specific safety program would you like to implement as far as TxDOT's future on these types of projects? Is there anything you can point out? A lot of good ideas they had. Is there anything you'd like to include, maybe some standard specifications?
Okay, so the question is there anything from the developers' safety practices that we'd like to make mandatory or consider including in our program? I have absolutely loved the Barrel Monster campaign because of its visibility and bringing those safety messages back. I don't think that that's one of those that you want to make mandatory, but I'd have to really think about whether you want to impose that. But the developer is responsible for their efforts, and I really do like the collaboration that we've developed with them on the driving through the project, because then they are able to see, essentially we're able to give them our insight. This is what we're looking at. They're looking at some different things, and so I think that really helps build the partnering that we are trying to get to, and then gives them insight into what we look at and how we see the situation. All right, well, thank you all.